unfold.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are undertaking a really radical shift in perspective on something you likely walk over or stand next to every day. The ground beneath the forest canopy. For centuries, the classical view of the forest, particularly in Western science, was defined by this idea of ruthless individual competition. Trees battling each other, canopy to canopy, for light, for water, for space.
And that view is, well, it's pretty much obsolete now. The science, especially in the last 3 decades, has ushered in this concept of a superorganism.
A superorganism?
Exactly. A deeply interconnected communicative system where individual entities, the trees and the fungi, function as components of a single vast collective.
Right.
This conceptual shift is so fundamental, and it really demands that we stop looking at the visible trunks and branches and start looking where the real complex action is happening below ground.
Absolutely. The Wood Wide Web has kind of entered the public consciousness as this almost poetic metaphor for trees sharing nutrients.
It has, yeah.
But the sources you shared with us today make it clear that we need to go far past the poetry. Our mission for this deep dive is to get into the evidence that this is a physical, highly complex, and functionally sophisticated infrastructure.
A genuine biological internet.
A genuine biological internet that not only facilitates trade, but also, as we'll see, chemical warfare, parasitic hacking, and even what some cutting-edge researchers are calling rudimentary forms of cognition.
And to achieve that depth, we have to immediately navigate the central scientific and, I guess, narrative conflict surrounding this topic. It's a big one.
Okay.
On one side, you have the immensely popular and benevolent mother tree narrative championed by Dr. Suzanne Simard. It's all about community, cooperation, even kinship.
The helping forest.
The helping forest.
Yeah.
But on the other side, you have this rising scientific skepticism led by the 𝐏𝐎𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒𝐒, which argues for a much colder reality, one governed by biological market economics, basically the capitalist forest.
So we're searching for the truth somewhere in the middle. It's not necessarily one extreme or the other, but maybe a decentralized intelligence driven by an incredibly complex mix of what? Altruism, commerce, and pure self-interest.
Exactly. A system so intricate that the brain of the forest floor, its communication grid, literally pulses with measurable electrical signals. That's where it gets really wild.
That's precisely where we're headed. This dive will give you, the listener, a fast-track understanding of the anatomy of this network, the political dynamics of cooperation versus competition, and the truly cutting-edge physics and biology behind fungal signaling and language.
A lot to unpack.
It is. Okay, let's get into it. If we are talking about a biological internet, we have to start with the wiring itself. Let's start literally from the ground up, the infrastructure of the hive mind.
To truly appreciate the complexity of the cooperation and competition, we first have to confront the sheer scale of the subterranean network that supports it all. This is the moment where we experience what I like to call scale shock.
Scale shock. I like that. When we describe soil, I think the average person thinks of inert matter, just dirt.
Right. Dirt.
But the reality is that the soil ecosystem is the densest biological matrix on the planet, and its density is, well, it's almost impossible to visualize in a normal frame of reference.
It really is.
Yeah.
I cannot overstate the magnitude of the connectivity down there. The sources show that a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil, a volume maybe the size of your thumb, can contain several miles of fungal hyphae.
Several miles in a teaspoon.
Several miles. That distance is the physical infrastructure, the literal wiring of this information superhighway, packed into a minuscule space.
That is genuinely mind-boggling. And these hyphae filaments, they're not just numerous, they are microscopic. We're talking about diameters that are, what, roughly 2 to 10 micrometers?
That's right. To give that perspective, that's about 1/10 the width of a single human hair. They are the microscopic cables that weave the entire forest floor into a unified mass.
And that density leads to a state of absolute hyperconnectivity.
Total hyperconnectivity. The fungal network dramatically outweighs the biomass and surface area of the tree roots it's supporting. A single gram of soil is so teeming with life that it can house up to 1 billion bacterial cells and kilometers of fungal filaments.
1 billion.
So for any organism, physical isolation is virtually impossible in this environment. Everything is in constant, intimate contact. It's not just a dense population, it's a fully connected, continuous network.
So if the massive tree roots are the anchors that hold the organism in place, the microscopic hyphae are the true architects and explorers of the soil.
That's a great way to put it.
What makes them so essential that the trees are willing to trade their most valuable commodity, the carbon they create through photosynthesis, for this service?
Well, the hyphae are specialized microminers. They navigate the soil volume with a precision that their relatively blunt, large tree roots simply cannot match. Tree roots, they only access the large structural spaces in the soil.
The big gap.
The big gaps. The hyphae filaments, because they're so tiny, can penetrate micropores and access minute pockets of resources that are otherwise completely locked away.
And what are they mining for specifically?
They are mining for distinct, crucial mineral resources. Things like phosphorus and certain forms of nitrogen, which are really difficult for the tree to access directly.
Why is that?
Because they're often chemically bound to soil particles, or they're only available in these tiny localized pockets. The fungus pulls these minerals out, and this is the commodity they trade with the host trees for fixed carbon sugars, which the fungi, being heterotrophs, can't produce themselves.
So it's a core metabolic trade agreement.
A fundamental agreement of the forest, yeah.
That sets up the economic motive. But structurally, how do these extremely fine filaments maintain integrity and exert force against the dense, often abrasive environment of the soil?
This is where we see some remarkable biological engineering. The structural integrity of the hyphae is maintained by tensional stress mechanics. Essentially, the cell walls of the hyphae are pressurized vessels, similar to a fire hose under high pressure, but microscopically small.
A biological pressure hose. But what does that pressure allow them to do?
It allows them to use this pressurized growth to exert significant force. Up to 12 atmospheres in some cases. Wow. And this force enables them to penetrate resistant soil particles, push through compact organic matter, and crucially, bridge tiny air gaps, maintaining a continuous, uninterrupted conduit through the soil.
So it's the pressure that gives it its strength.
The continuous turgor pressure provides the rigidity necessary to explore vast areas and hold the network structure together. If they lost that pressure, the network would just instantly collapse into these fragile little strands.
So the pressure system is both the engine of exploration and the structural support. This allows the network to function not just as a collection of loose filaments, but as a continuous biological tissue, constantly exploring and exchanging information.
Exactly. It's an integrated, active tissue layer across the entire forest floor.
Now that we understand the scale and the engineering, we have to turn to the architecture. Because this network is vast, but it is not a single monolithic entity.
No, not at all.
It's composed of specialized symbiotic cliques, different architectural strategies based on how the fungus physically fuses with the root.
That distinction is absolutely critical. The relationship between tree and fungus is not casual. It's a defined physical fusion that dictates how they live and how they exchange resources. And we categorize these relationships into two main architectural camps.
Okay, let's start with what you were calling the superhighways of resource transfer.
Those would be the ectomycorrhizal, or ECM, networks. The term ecto means outside, which gives you the key to their structure.
Right.
They dominate temperate and boreal forests. This is where you find your pines, your firs, birches, and oaks. And significantly, this ECM architecture is the setting for the vast majority of the famous mother tree research we're going to discuss later.
And their unique interface is defined by this external sheath.
Correct. The fungus forms a dense, visible sheath, or mantle, wrapped tightly around the root tip. And the key exchange zone is the Hardick net, which is a labyrinthine structure of hyphae that grows between the root cortical cells.
So it never actually penetrates the tree's cell walls?
Never. It's an incredibly intricate external handshake designed to maximize surface area for nutrient exchange without violating the structural integrity of the tree cells.
And ECM fungi, you said, are designed for long-haul shipping.
They are the undisputed masters of long-distance transport. ECM fungi often produce these things called rhizomorphs. These are thick, macroscopic, cord-like bundles of parallel hyphae.
So you can actually see them?
You can, yeah. And these rhizomorphs function as the biological superhighways we mentioned. Their structural complexity and their size allow them to efficiently move nutrients and signals over many meters, connecting individual trees into vast, large-scale community nodes.
Okay, so let's contrast that with the older, but equally vital network, the arbuscular mycorrhizal, or AM networks. These sound more like the local streets.
They really are the ancient understory network. The AM lineage is incredibly old, dating back about 450 million years. They were instrumental in the colonization of land by plants.
Wow.
And you find them associated with many broadleaf trees like maples, cedars, redwoods, and virtually all grasses. So while the ECM networks are specialized highways, the AM networks are the ubiquitous foundational connectivity layer.
And here, the fusion strategy is completely different. It's internal.
It's a literal penetration.
Huh.
The fungal hyphae do not stop at the cell walls. They penetrate the root cell walls and form these intricate, highly branched, tree-like structures called arbuscules inside the plant cells.
Inside the cells.
Right inside. The cell membrane of the root cell remains intact, though. It just surrounds the arbuscule, which maximizes the contact surface for metabolic exchange.
So the ECM network is this external labyrinth, and the AM network is an internal branch tree structure. It's all about maximizing efficiency for their different needs.
Exactly. The AM networks generally operate over a smaller physical range than the rhizomorph-equipped ECM networks, but they are far more widespread and ancient, forming the crucial, ever-present understory connectivity across global ecosystems.
This raises a really important question. We have these two vast systems. Is the forest just segregated into ECM forests and AM forests, or do these two worlds ever connect?
That is a critical point that points toward the formation of a true meta-network. And no, the forest is not fully segregated. The sources identify what they call dual mycorrhizal tree species, like certain alders or poplars.
Ah, so these are the crucial meta-network bridges. What defines them?
These species have the genetic capacity to host both ECM and AM networks simultaneously, maybe on different parts of their root systems or even at different life stages.
So they're bilingual, essentially.
They're bilingual. They potentially act as bridge species, linking what would otherwise be disparate ECM and AM networks. Now, even if the fungi themselves don't physiologically fuse, the shared host tree, the bridge, allows chemical signals and resources to flow from an AM network through the tree's metabolic system and then out into an ECM network.
So it effectively integrates the entire communication system, creating one massive, complex web where the ancient local streets connect to the modern, high-capacity interstates, and the tree itself is the central router.
That's a perfect analogy. And that continuous high-capacity network sets the stage for the greatest scientific debate in forest ecology today. What is the purpose of this incredibly sophisticated infrastructure? Is it built for community or purely for commerce?
This is where the forest shifts from a backdrop of biology to a dynamic political landscape. And this moves us into part 2, altruism versus economics, the battle for the forest's soul. We have to start with the narrative that captured the public imagination. The cooperative forest, the mother tree hypothesis, largely popularized by the research of Dr. Suzanne Simard.
This narrative provides the emotional core. It suggests altruism, community, and social support. It really challenged decades of ecological thinking by proposing that trees are more like members of a family than ruthless competitors.
And the foundational evidence for this shift is truly fascinating, the isotopic proof. Can you walk us through the methodologies Simard used? I mean, how did she prove that carbon moved from one tree to another, literally against the scientific dogma of the time?
Her work was so groundbreaking because she was the first to use radio-labeled tracers in the field. She utilized both stable carbon-13 and, crucially, radioactive carbon-14.
Two different kinds.
Right. And using two different isotopes allowed her to track flows between two different species simultaneously, which was absolutely key to proving reciprocity.
So how did she actually apply the labels?
She used a sophisticated tenting or bagging system. She would enclose the foliage of a donor tree, say, a paper birch, and then pump in carbon dioxide gas that was heavily enriched with these traceable isotopes. The birch would then photosynthesize this labeled CO2, incorporating the traceable carbon into its sugars. Now, if the conventional wisdom was true, all that labeled carbon should have stayed right there, inside the birch.
But that's not what happened.
Not at all. Using specialized detection equipment like Geiger counters, she detected the labeled isotopes in the roots and sometimes even the leaves of neighboring non-tented Douglas fir seedlings days later.
Wow.
This was direct physical proof. Carbon, the currency of life, had moved underground between two different tree species. It was a transfer of energy that challenged the idea of pure competitive isolation.
And the movement wasn't just random leakage. It followed a logical reciprocal pattern, which suggests a managed exchange based on seasonal need. This is the source-sink dynamic.
It was a beautiful piece of ecological observation. The famous example involves the deciduous birch and the evergreen fir.
Right.
In the spring and early summer, the birch, fully leafed out, is the carbon source, photosynthesizing rapidly. It sends excess carbon, the labeled carbon, to the shaded evergreen Douglas fir seedlings below, which are the carbon sink, struggling for light.
So it's actively supporting the weak.
It appears to be, yes. But then as the season progresses, and especially when the birch leaves senesce and drop in the autumn, the evergreen firs, which are still photosynthesizing, reverse the flow.
Ah, so the fir pays it back.
The fir then becomes the source, supporting the birch through the late dormancy phase. It looked precisely like a reciprocal community support system, optimizing the resource use of the entire collective throughout the year.
This physiological observation led directly to the grand concept, the mother tree, the central node of the entire system.
Yes, these mother trees are defined as the largest, oldest, most ancient hub trees in the ecosystem. They possess these vast, established root systems that integrate into the fungal network, connecting to potentially hundreds of younger trees.
The matriarchs.
They are. They act as central nodes, the anchor points of the entire community, stabilizing the soil, and crucially, acting as the resource bank.
And the most controversial yet deeply compelling element of this theory is the idea of kin recognition. The idea that the mother tree isn't just supporting its neighbor, it's supporting its genetic offspring. Does a mother tree really know its children?
The research suggests this high level of discernment is possible. Simard's experiment suggested that mother trees can indeed distinguish their own genetic offspring, or kin, from unrelated stranger seedlings. And the behavioral implications are profound.
What are the behavioral differences that they observed between kin and strangers?
When the mother tree's roots encounter kin, they appear to exhibit a measurable reduction in their own fine root proliferation near those specific seedlings.
So they're giving them space.
It's often interpreted as minimizing competition, giving the sapling elbow room. Even more importantly, they are hypothesized to preferentially shunt carbon and critical nutrients to these kin seedlings.
That sounds like a true biological trust fund, where centuries of accumulated resources are deployed to maximize the survival rate of the next generation. What's the proposed mechanism for this recognition? How does it work?
It's hypothesized to involve specific chemical signaling via the network, likely through root exudates or markers. Plants have highly complex chemical communication systems.
Sure.
They could be releasing unique molecules that act almost like immune system recognition markers in animal-specific chemical names or codes that the fungal network can detect, allowing the tree to adjust its physiological response accordingly.
So it moves beyond simple cooperation into sophisticated programmed social behavior. And then there's the ultimate act of community, the dying breath of the forest.
This is perhaps the most poignant element of the entire narrative. Research indicates that when a mother tree is severely injured, stressed, or approaching death, it performs a massive final act of transfer. It actively pulses its remaining stored carbon and nutrient reserves, often in highly concentrated form, into the mycorrhizal network.
Why do that? Why not just hoard it?
Well, this final act ensures that centuries of accumulated energy, the entire lifetime of resource gathering, remains within the ecosystem. This energy legacy supports the resilience, diversity, and survival of its neighbors and kin, preventing a localized collapse of the system when a major node fails. It's the ultimate biological insurance policy.
The implication for forestry management here is huge. If you clear-cut or remove the supposed weed species, like the paper birch when you want to grow a Douglas fir plantation, you are literally severing the lifelines of the entire community.
You're removing the nurses, the bankers, the support structure.
Exactly. This narrative is powerful, it's compelling, and it has absolutely shaped public perception. It offers this beautiful integrated vision of nature. But science is a process of testing, retesting, and critique.
Always.
So we must now turn to the necessary dramatic tension, the counter-narrative, which argues that we may have projected our own human desires for community and altruism onto a system driven by much colder, harder economic laws.
This is the scientific civil war, crystallized by the 2023 Karst critique. Exactly. Justine Karst and her colleagues published this highly influential, comprehensive meta-analysis that critically examined the evidence base for the cooperative forest. Their primary and very direct argument was that the evidence for common mycorrhizal networks, or CMNs, consistently improving seedling survival rates in the wild is, and I'm quoting their work here, insufficiently supported.
Insufficiently supported. So how did they argue that the science supporting the mother tree concept had become biased?
They identified a significant phenomenon they termed positive citation bias. They meticulously tracked citation patterns and observed that papers claiming positive effects of CMN's resource sharing, increased survival, altruism, were cited exponentially more often than papers that found neutral or outright negative effects, or those that questioned the mechanism.
So an echo chamber effect that romanticized the data.
Precisely. This selective amplification allowed a beautiful and popular narrative to quickly become treated as settled scientific fact, even when the underlying field evidence was inconsistent, or when the experiments proving transfer were conducted under highly controlled, unrealistic laboratory conditions. The critique forces us to be much more rigorous.
Let's focus on the argument of biological insignificance. Transfers may happen, as Simard proved, but the critics argue that in a natural forest setting, the quantity transferred simply doesn't matter.
This is a core point of contention. Critics will concede that labeled carbon transfer can be demonstrated, often quite easily in simplified lab setups called mesocosms. However, they point out that in natural, complex field conditions, the transfer amount of carbon is frequently, biologically insignificant.
What does insignificant mean in terms of the actual data?
In many studies, the carbon transfer to a recipient seedling amounted to less than 5% of that receiver's total daily carbon requirement.
Only 5%.
Right. So if a struggling seedling needs 100 units of carbon per day to survive drought or deep shade, and it receives a 5-unit bonus, that 5 units is not the lifeline the narrative suggests it is. The seedling's fate is still fundamentally determined by its own access to light, its photosynthetic capacity, and its water uptake.
So the transfer might be real, but it's more like a negligible bonus than a guaranteed rescue.
That's the economic interpretation. It's a low-volume flow that is unlikely to alter the trajectory of a struggling tree in a competitive environment. And furthermore, critics suggest that the methods used in the field, which often involve separating roots from fungi using fine mesh, sometimes fail to account for alternative non-fungal pathways.
This leads to the leaky pipe theory, the challenge that the transfer necessarily goes through the hyphae.
Yes, Simard proved carbon moved from point A to point B, but not necessarily that the mycorrhizal network was the only or even the primary conduit.
So what are the other options?
The critics proposed 2 main alternative pathways. First, simple soil diffusion. Roots are constantly exuding sugars, amino acids, and compounds into the rhizosphere, the immediate soil zone. These compounds could simply diffuse through the soil water, be metabolized by soil microbes, and then be taken up by a neighbor's roots or fungus as simple waste products.
So less an internet connection and more a leaky pipe of exudate.
Exactly. And the second pathway is even more physical and direct.
Which is?
Root grafts. Trees of the same species, especially older trees like Douglas fir, frequently undergo a process called anastomosis, where their vascular systems physically fuse together.
They literally join.
They literally join. This creates direct, open vascular tunnels between the trees. Sap and resources can flow directly from root to root, entirely bypassing the fungal network. Skeptics argue that many observed large-scale transfers, especially in single-species forests, were actually mediated by these root-to-root grafts and were just being incorrectly attributed to the Wood Wide Web.
This brings us to the philosophical counterargument that really underlies the critique. The capitalist forest, explained through biological market theory.
This is the critical shift in worldview. Biological market theory views the relationship not as a family, but as a ruthless market where evolutionary fitness is the only motive.
Right.
Fungi are not benevolent couriers or socialists. They are heterotrophs, motivated solely to acquire and maximize their carbon intake. They are selfish economic agents in a highly competitive system.
So any perceived cooperation under this theory must be explained as either a byproduct of self-interest or, I guess, a mistake.
Precisely. The theory suggests that fungi may hoard carbon taken from a productive donor tree, storing it for their own growth or future needs. If some of that carbon ends up in a neighboring tree, it could be simply leakage, an unavoidable byproduct of maintaining these vast territorial mycelial networks.
That's just inefficient.
Exactly. And evolutionarily, fungi should be incentivized to trade nutrients, the phosphorus and nitrogen they mine, to the tree that offers the best exchange rate of carbon.
The highest bidder, essentially.
Yes. If a strong, sun-soaked tree offers a better quality or quantity of carbon for the same amount of phosphorus, the fungus should preferentially channel its efforts and its resources toward that tree. This creates a competitive capitalist dynamic where resources flow optimally to the strongest, most productive nodes, maximizing the return on investment for the fungus rather than altruistically supporting the weak and needy.
This debate Socialism versus capitalism, altruism versus self-interest, is what truly defines the forest as a complex, adaptive system. It transforms that romantic vision into a fascinating, dynamic political landscape of negotiation and trade.
It really does.
But regardless of the motivation, the network itself is the undeniable conduit. And that conduit, we discover in the next section, is designed to carry much more than just carbon and nutrients. It carries secrets and weapons.
And that's where part 3 takes us, into the deeper complexity and potential cognition of this system, starting with the very dark side. Chemical warfare and parasitic hacking. The idea of a superorganism might sound unified, but even the most unified systems, like ant colonies, often employ ruthless internal dynamics. The network, at its core, is also a battlefield.
It's a chilling thought that the same cables carrying the biological trust fund can also carry poison. Let's talk about allelopathy, the chemical inhibition of one plant by another, and how the Wood Wide Web becomes an efficient biological delivery system.
The classic example is the black walnut, Juglans migra. This tree produces a highly potent allelotoxin called juglone, which is lethal or severely growth inhibiting to many common competitors, like pines and certain fruit trees.
Right, I've heard you shouldn't plant a garden near a black walnut.
Exactly. And traditionally, ecologists thought juglone spread slowly, either through passive soil diffusion or the leaching of toxins from fallen leaves.
But the research suggests the fungal network drastically speeds up and even targets the dissemination of the weapon.
That's the key finding. Researchers conducted these experiments using sophisticated hydrophobic mesh barriers. These barriers were designed to block direct root contact between the walnut and its neighbors, while still allowing the microscopic fungal hyphae to pass through.
And what did they find?
These tests demonstrated unequivocally that the mycorrhizal networks actively transport allelochemicals like juglone.
So the fungus becomes an intentional delivery system, extending the range of the weapon.
It transforms the fungus from a simple traitor into a partner in chemical warfare. By delivering the juglone, the fungus effectively extends the toxin's bioactive zone far beyond the immediate root system of the walnut tree, eliminating competitors and giving the host tree a massive ecological advantage.
And potentially guaranteeing the fungus more exclusive access to that tree's carbon reserves.
That's the theory. A win-win for the partnership.
And this network is also vulnerable to exploitation by invaders, those who hack the system for their own gain.
Absolutely. Invasive network parasites exploit this system ruthlessly. A clear example is Nicotiana glauca, or tree tobacco, an aggressive invasive species. This species taps into the native arbuscular mycorrhizal networks, the ancient ubiquitous ones, and then, instead of treating fairly, it releases its own allelochemicals into the network.
Which is like the chemical equivalent of a distributed denial of service attack.
Essentially, yes. These chemicals disrupt the mutualistic associations of the native plants, so the invader simultaneously utilizes the infrastructure for its own resource uptake while actively degrading and sabotaging the critical communication and support structures for everyone else.
It's ecological sabotage.
It's a highly effective, complex ecological sabotage that establishes dominance by crippling the host community's primary lifeline.
And speaking of parasites, let's look at one of the most stunning examples of biological hacking in the forest. The ghost pipe, Monotropa uniflora. This plant has literally evolved a career as a thief.
The ghost pipe is visually startling. A ghostly white, waxy plant, completely lacking in chlorophyll. It has abandoned photosynthesis entirely, which classifies it as a mycoheterotroph.
Fungal feeder.
A fungal feeder, literally. It cannot make its own food.
And it performs a direct carbon heist, but it doesn't tap the tree directly. It taps the fungus that is connected to the tree.
Precisely. It's a targeted three-party heist. The ghost pipe is highly specialized, targeting only specific fungal partners, primarily the Russulaceae family, which typically form beneficial mutualisms with trees like beech and oak.
Okay.
The fungus harvests carbon from the oak, intending to trade it for phosphorus. The ghost pipe then reverses the flow, stealing the carbon that the fungus initially obtained in good faith from the photosynthetic tree partner.
And the plant has physically and even genomically adapted for a life of crime. What does its DNA tell us about this specialization?
The genomic analysis is striking. Monotropa has undergone significant genomic streamlining, shedding genes that are no longer necessary. It has lost the entire suite of genes essential for photosynthesis, like the light-harvesting complex genes, and even genes for normal hormone signaling, like auxin transport.
So it literally edited its own genome down to the essential metabolic machinery required only to process the stolen goods.
It's the ultimate evolutionary commitment to theft.
But the fungus has to connect to the plant first. How does the ghost pipe trick the fungus into forming a partnership that it will only exploit? It needs credentials or a login spoof.
That's where chemical mimicry comes in. Fungi are signaled to branch and colonize roots by specific plant hormones called strigolactones. These hormones act as a chemical come-hither signal.
Okay.
Monotropa likely produces chemical analogs of these strigolactones, maybe slightly altered versions that mimic the signal of a legitimate tree partner.
So it essentially spoofs the login credentials of a legitimate mutualist, convincing the fungus that it's forming a mutually beneficial connection.
Exactly. And once it's tricked, the physical interface of the theft is highly specialized. Unlike the Hartig net, which is an intricate exchange surface, the ghost pipe forms a structure called the fungal peg. This peg penetrates the epidermal cells of the monotropa root, getting deep into the plant tissue.
And then the mechanism for sucking the nutrients out, how does that work?
This is the critical final step: active transport. The plant deploys specialized internal structures, particularly highly efficient sucrose transporters. These transporters work to create an extreme concentration gradient, actively pulling or sucking the sugar molecules out of the fungal hyphae and into the ghost pipe system.
It's an enforced siphon.
An enforced unidirectional siphon, proving that the network, while powerful, is far from immune to this kind of highly evolved, sophisticated, and targeted hacking.
So far, we focused heavily on the flow of carbon and toxic chemicals through the network. But the infrastructure also moves the most essential resource of all for survival in a changing climate: water. Let's move to the hydraulic dynamics, the breath and pump of the forest.
It's often overlooked, but the forest doesn't just manage nutrients. It actively regulates the moisture profile of the soil volume using the root-fungal interface. Trees act as massive hydraulic pumps that stabilize their environment, which, crucially, is also essential for the survival of the fungi themselves during dry periods.
And the classic example of this is hydraulic lift, which sounds a bit counterintuitive because it involves the tree releasing water it has already absorbed.
It is counterintuitive. During the hot part of the day, trees transpire, pulling water from deep, moist layers up to their leaves. At night, when transpiration slows or stops, the tension in the water column relaxes.
Okay.
Deep-rooted trees, oaks, aspens, or certain maples continue to draw water up due to their enormous root surface area. But when the water potential gradient reverses, when the deep soil is wetter than the shallow soil, this water leaks out of the lateral roots into the dry, shallow upper soil layers.
It's like the tree exhaling water back into the environment. And what's the ecological benefit of this exhaled water?
The benefit is profound. This process rehydrates the upper soil horizon, which is absolutely critical for two things. First, keeping the shallow-rooted mycorrhizal fungi alive during periods of drought, allowing the network to survive, and second, providing moisture for smaller understory plants that lack deep roots.
And this is a measurable amount.
It's significant. Our sources note rates of up to 0.249 millimeters of water per day in some temperate forests, which is a measurable volume of water being moved purely for environmental regulation.
And the flow isn't just one direction. It can reverse in the opposite season or during localized floods.
That's hydraulic descent. In the wet season, especially during heavy rains, the upper soil is saturated. The process flips. The roots of the deep-rooted trees move excess surface water down into deep soil storage. They are effectively banking water for the ecosystem, mitigating surface runoff and stabilizing the soil profile. They're active environmental managers.
And the complexity ramps up even further with recent research on populus or poplar trees, which revealed that this is not just a daily switch, but a constant, fine-tuned balancing act.
That research revealed bidirectional flow simultaneously within the same root system. Researchers used these delicate heat pulse sensors placed at different depths in the roots, and they found water could flow simultaneously into one part of the root system, say from a moist pocket, and out of another part of the same root system, releasing into a dry pocket.
So the tree isn't just a pump moving water one direction per day. It's a dynamic regulator.
Precisely. It's constantly adjusting the hydration of the soil volume in response to microgradients. This disproved the idea of passive flow and showed that the tree is actively balancing the water potential of its rhizosphere for its own benefit and, crucially, for the benefit and survival of its fungal partners. The hydraulic system is tightly integrated into the superorganism's maintenance system.
This constant, complex, dynamic regulation of resources and environment pushes us firmly past simple chemistry and economics and into the final, most abstract part of our deep dive, the possibility of fungal cognition. We're moving into the realm of the neural forest.
This is truly the frontier of mycology and computer science. If the chemical signals we discussed earlier, the hormones, are the slow-moving messages of the superorganism, then the electrical signals are its neurons. The research proposes that the fungal network functions as a biological brain, processing information via rapid electrical spikes.
I find this idea absolutely incredible. Fungal hyphae as excitable tissues, responding to stimuli with electrical impulses similar to our own nerves.
It's a remarkable discovery. Hyphae are, in fact, excitable tissues. They maintain a resting potential across their cell membranes, which is driven by proton pumps. These pumps are constantly working to establish an electrical gradient.
Okay.
When the hyphae are stimulated by a change in temperature, pressure from touch, or a chemical presence, they generate action potentials, or APs.
Are these APs identical to the signals in an animal brain?
Structurally, they are strikingly similar, but functionally they are much, much slower. The impulse involves a rapid ion flux, specifically a temporary influx of positive calcium ions, followed by the efflux of potassium and chloride ions. This temporary change in membrane voltage generates the electrical impulse, which then travels along the hyphae, propagating information about the stimulus to the rest of the colony.
Maintaining that resting potential via the proton pump sounds metabolically expensive. If the fungus expends all that energy to create an electrical gradient, the signal must be important enough to justify the cost.
That's the critical inference. If the system is costly to maintain, its function is likely crucial for survival and coordination. But while they are similar to animal neurons, their speed is the differentiator. Animal neurons are millisecond. Fungal action potentials operate on a scale of seconds to minutes.
So much slower.
Much slower, propagating at speeds of about 0.5 to 2 millimeters per second. It's built for slow, methodical, colony-wide coordination, not lightning-fast reflexes.
This functional electrical signaling led to one of the most provocative and debated papers in recent years. The fungal language hypothesis, championed by computer scientists, notably Andrew 𝐏𝐿𝐿.
Right, and 𝐏𝐿𝐿 approached the problem not as a biologist, but as a computational linguist. He monitored the electrical activity of several fungal species, including split gill, looking specifically for patterns that exceeded random biological noise.
And he identified a potential vocabulary from the spike pattern.
Yes, he found that the electrical spikes clustered into distinct, non-random trains or packets. By analyzing the pauses between these trains, he treated the packets as functional units of information biological words. He identified a lexicon of up to 50 unique spike patterns or words used by the fungi, which appeared to be specific to the species.
50 words, that's small, but functionally significant. And the structural analysis of those sentences is what made the claim truly explosive.
This is the most remarkable part. He found that the distribution of these word lengths, the number of spikes within a train, followed mathematical linguistic laws, specifically Zipf's law, which governs the structure of human languages like English or Russian. This statistical correlation suggested that the signal sequences were organized with a syntax optimized for communication, not just random biological noise.
So if we accept this framework, what is this language communicating across the network?
𝐏𝐿𝐿 hypothesizes that these signals are fundamentally coordinating complex behaviors necessary for colony homeostasis and management. This could include directing growth toward new food sources, signaling acute physical injury or stress, or managing the precise logistics of nutrient transport across vast distances. It's a functional, distributed language for managing a multi-meter-wide organism.
Okay, this is where we need to introduce the necessary scientific rigor. The claim of language has met with significant resistance in the biological community. What are the key counter-arguments to this interpretation?
The resistance really boils down to the difference between syntax and semantics pattern versus meaning.
Right.
Critics argue forcefully that possessing a repeatable rhythmic pattern, or syntax, does not automatically imply communicative meaning or semantics. They point out that many biological processes inherently produce rhythms, heartbeats, breathing, a dripping tap. The electrical spikes could simply be rhythmic byproducts of the physical process of nutrient transport.
So if the fungus needs to move water and sugar, it uses a calcium wave to drive turgor pressure, and that calcium wave just happens to produce an electrical signature.
Exactly. The movement of ions, particularly calcium, is inextricably linked to physiological processes like growth and the maintenance of turgor pressure. The electrical spikes might simply be the sound of the plumbing working, not an intentional message. The debate, therefore, is whether the signal is the message or just an unavoidable byproduct of the flow.
Furthermore, critics caution against anthropomorphism. Labeling these pulses words imposes a human framework that may be fundamentally misleading.
That's a very valid concern. The process is likely more akin to highly optimized computer code or machine language, a series of if-then commands executed by the fungal hardware to optimize efficiency and resource allocation. It is a system processing information for sure, but labeling it a language might oversell the cognitive complexity.
Regardless of whether it's poetry or C++ code, the functional capacity of the network to process electrical information is undeniable. And the most tangible proof that this network is a functional computational entity lies in the field of fungal computing.
This takes us from abstract biology to actual engineering. The electrical capacity of mycelium is functional and exploitable. Researchers have successfully used dried mycelium, the network structure itself, to create memristors, which are a fundamental component of artificial intelligence and neuromorphic chips.
Okay, explain what a memristor is and why mycelium can function as one.
A memristor is a blend of a resistor and a memory device. Its electrical resistance changes based on the history of the current that has passed through it. In essence, it remembers past electrical events. Since the fungal network alters its conductivity based on ion flux and the maintenance of its cell walls, all influenced by its electrical history, it can function as a biological memory circuit.
A living circuit that's capable of learning.
Yes. By stimulating these mycelial networks with electrical inputs, scientists can train them to recognize patterns and perform basic Boolean logic operations like AND or OR and NOT. Crucially, the network actively alters its internal conductivity based on that past electrical input, demonstrating that it is effectively learning and adapting its physical structure in response to information.
And this capability has moved out of the lab and into incredible applications, cementing the idea that the forest floor is literally a computational matrix.
It has. It has led to the development of living electronics and biohybrid systems. Fungal skins are being used as self-healing sensors in experimental smart buildings. Mycelial processors are being researched for use in biohybrid robots, taking advantage of the network's decentralized adaptive computational capacity. This proves, in the most literal and high-tech sense, that the Wood Wide Web is far more than just dirt and roots. It is a complex, active, computational entity.
This entire deep dive has taken us on a remarkable journey below the surface. We started with the simple cooperative vision, the mother tree, the exchange of carbon, and we dove headfirst into the brutal reality of market economics, chemical warfare, and parasitic hacking.
And we culminated with the high-tech reality of a decentralized electrical entity. I think the key takeaway is that the forest is not a single, unified, benevolent consciousness, but a complex, adaptive system. It's a biological stock market, a dynamic ecosystem where billions of agents, trees, fungi, parasites, microbes are constantly trading, stealing, negotiating, and cooperating to optimize their own survival.
The paradox is what makes it so spectacularly alien and compelling. The system is simultaneously social, where mother trees demonstrably support kin and transfer legacies, and brutally competitive, where black walnuts poison their neighbors and ghost pipes hack the entire infrastructure.
And it's sentient.
And now we have to accept that it is also sentient in a way, processing information via these slow-moving electrical spikes and chemical gradients.
The investigation really reveals a forest that is far more spectacular and, I guess, intelligent than the passive backdrop we once imagined. We have to move past the simple romantic metaphor of talking trees to the complex reality of a decentralized electrical entity that manages resources, fights wars, and even learns from electrical stimuli. The forest is not just alive, it is functionally electrically awake.
So, what does this all mean for us? If the forest floor is a vast, self-regulating, electrically active computational matrix, what implications does this realization have for how humanity manages or coexists with these massive, complex biological systems? Does understanding the sheer ancient complexity of this decentralized intelligence change the way we approach conservation, moving us from merely protecting nature to perhaps respecting and coexisting with a non-human computational entity on a global scale? That changes the equation entirely the next time you step into the woods.
A provocative and essential question for the future of ecology and technology alike.
That was the deep dive. We'll see you next time.